Hey, good morning. I'm Mark Snowden, and this is my lovely wife, Mary Lee, and we're with the Cincinnati Area Baptist Association, and we're here with Susan and Curt Wible. We are actually having a conversation on grace marriage. How's that? And really do appreciate you two being with us. We appreciate others that might be joining in or whatever we might have, and we appreciate Kumar and Charity being with us right now. But let me just get started. If you all don't mind telling us just a little bit about yourselves and let us meet Curt and Susan.
Okay. So Susan and I have been married for about 35 years, and we actually met in high school. So our first date was a senior skate night. We met in economics class and started dating. And my economics teacher actually said, you know, your grades have gone down since you started dating that Susan girl. So was obviously interested. And so then during college, we went off to two different colleges, but continued to stay in touch. And then maybe interesting when we both came home after graduating and kind of just did things together. And if you had asked either one of us if there's any future for the relationship, we would have said, nope, we're just friends and nothing's going to happen. And then we were talking marriage about a month later. So it has been good. I married up, as a lot of people would say.
Amen.
So I don't know. So that's a little bit about us in terms of how we met. I do small business consulting. I lived in Cincinnati for a number of years, worked for Procter and Gamble, and then have kind of gotten into the doing work in marriage. And so do some work for Grace Marriage, which is an absolute blast to be having an impact on people's marriages. So it's a little bit about me.
So as Curt said, we went to two different colleges. I went 650 miles away. And so when Curt in high school said, well, you know, why don't we just date each other? I was like, no. And so because I went so far away for college, when I came home during the summer, we would just hang out and do things together because we were friends. And sometimes we were dating and sometimes we weren't, but we pretty much always stayed in touch. And as Curt said, then shortly after we got our undergraduate, then we were talking marriage, and we got married when he was in graduate school. And then for most of the time, I homeschooled. We have 4 children and homeschooled the 3 boys until they went to college. And then our youngest ended up going to a small private Christian school when she was probably about 9th grade. And I ended up teaching part-time, and I now do the accounting work for the school. So that's where we are now. And we have 2 grandchildren and 2 sons that are married.
Awesome. Now, I know that Grace Marriage is based out of Kentucky, but you guys live in Indianapolis, is that right?
That is correct. We live in Indianapolis. So in the world of remote working, you know, the time that I spend with Grace Marriage, we can pull that off with Zoom calls.
Sure.
But interestingly, we do have a big heart for Cincinnati because Curt was with Procter and Gamble for the better part of 17 years, and we lived in Cincinnati. And our youngest, interestingly, is at University of Cincinnati, finishing her 4th year there in the DAP program.
Wow, that's great. That's the design school, right?
Yes.
Right, interior design.
Yeah, I've heard wonderful things about that from our collegiate ministry guy. Well, we're here to talk about marriage today. What got you guys involved in marriage ministry in the first place?
Well, it was probably one of those interesting journeys that God puts you on. So we were attending a church, and the church oversaw a campus ministry. So we had ultimately about 50 college students making a 30 to 40 minute trek to the north side of Indianapolis to go to church. And the church said, you know what, we need to plant one closer to the campus. So they planted it closer and started growing it. It was full of a bunch of college students. About 8 years ago, we kind of moved from the mothership, you know, to the daughtership, and started getting involved. And at that point, it was a very young demographic church. And so most of these kids had come to Christ in college, did not have great role models, or did not come from intact, I'm going to say functional or believing homes for most of them. So they didn't really know how to do marriage. We were the old people there, as we like to say. And so they said, hold it, you guys have been married for a while. You guys are happily married. How about doing premarital counseling? And I think one year we had what, 12 weddings in the course of the year, or by June, I don't remember which. And this is a church of 120 people.
Wow.
So there's a lot of needs. So we started doing that and really enjoyed it. And then as part of that, our pastor asked us to go to a training on grace marriage. He said, we've heard about it. Maybe we ought to do it here. So we went off and spent a day getting trained on it and thought it was really good.
Mhm.
So we brought it back to our church, did a pilot, then expanded it. We have 30 couples in it roughly now. But out of that, it was just, I don't know, God moving to say, you know, I've got some different things going on. You've got some changes coming in what you're doing with the business you own. And so ultimately, after prayer and God moving things, I started doing some work for Grace Marriage. And so that's kind of where I'm at now, is we lead the marriage ministry at our church. We lead Grace Marriage at our church. And then I'm working to spend more and more time from really a vocation doing things with Grace Marriage. So that's kind of how we got there. I don't know if you'd have anything to add to that.
Well, and interestingly, in the last year, we've been able to become a little bit more involved with Hope Restored, which is connected to focus on the family. And so we've been going up to Michigan and being host couples for couples that are attending a 4-day marriage intensive at like a retreat center, and kind of coming alongside them. And that's been very rewarding as well. Couples that are coming in crisis and leaving with much more hope and some tools in place to help their marriage.
I think, you know, the last part is our kids are launching now, you know, so our 3 oldest are all out of the house, you know, gainfully employed, you know, things like that. Our youngest is finishing up college. And so we're hitting the empty nest stage. And there's a lot of excitement on our part to go, this is going to be a lot of fun. We don't have the schedule that we had before. We can do different things. We can do some ministry together. And so there's also a bit of how can we help other couples get to our point in life and look forward to it.
Right. Well, I mean, you mentioned that. I'm sorry, Susan, excuse me.
Well, I was just saying, and unfortunately, I think all of us can, we know of couples that have gotten to this stage, they launch their children, and they're not looking forward to the next few years with their spouse, and they're getting divorced. And so I think all of us can name people like that. And so not only are we excited about helping new marriages as they are setting habits and ways of relating to each other early in a marriage, but it's been actually encouraging. We've been able to come alongside couples that have been married almost as long as we have, and feel like we all can use that extra help at this time in our life as well.
I've been looking at some statistics getting ready for today, and I noticed that in Ohio, marriage is up just 1 percentage point, and divorce is down by about 2%. But what's interesting is fewer people are getting married. And you know what I mean? It's almost like those that had the marriage are sticking with it. So why is marriage important in the first place? Let's just go with maybe down to the basics.
Sure.
Marriage important.
First of all, God designed it. And if you go into scripture in Hebrew, it talks about, you know, let marriage be held with honor. And if you really think about all of scripture starts with a marriage with Adam and Eve, and it ends with a marriage with, you know, with Christ and his church, and it's a love story in between. You know, so it's a rich analogy, you know, for our relationship. And you know, God gives us some really neat spiritual lessons from it. You know, the intimacy, the closeness that you have with your spouse is a way God is trying to show us what that's going to look like in terms of our relationship with him. So I think that's a big piece that's going on.
I think also we have to be aware that when our marriages are definitely a reflection of our relationship with Christ. And I think that we have a hurting world that is really looking for marriages that are healthy, that are encouraging to one another, that are supportive. And I think as Christians, this is a wonderful way that we can be a light to a very dark world right now.
Well, and in that sense, it's a very tangible example of the gospel. So I know someone who he had an intern staying with him doing some work. Actually, it was with Grace Marriage, and so Brad was recording a video, and his wife was participating. Well, someone called his wife to say, "Hey, we'll be by in 15 minutes to pick you up," and her response was, "What?" So she was not aware, and so this intern is watching this whole dialogue. And so when they get together, he watched the grace that Marilyn gave to Brad, even though she was like, "Tell me you didn't know this was going on." And Brad was like, "No, I knew, I just forgot to tell you." He saw the grace that was given, and he realized, I haven't been given grace to my parents. So he saw a very tangible example of the grace that God gives to us in the form of a marriage that changed how he viewed his relationship with his parents. And so marriage gives you a great platform to show God's grace to a very needy world.
Awesome. I appreciate the way that when you were talking about marriage, you immediately went to scripture. And I appreciate that right now. I know a biblical understanding of marriage is under attack between one biological woman and one biological man. I have actually seen a church, one of our churches in Cincinnati, change their bylaws to put the words biological in there, biological man and biological woman, because of what the Supreme Court did, basically saying anybody that wants to consider themselves married can do that. Which to me means marriage is pretty much under attack from a biblical standpoint and what Christians have traditionally experienced and defined. I don't know, what do you see is going on with the state of marriage right now? I mean, in America, in families, I mean, where are we? Is it a good thing, or are you just weirdos if you get married?
Well, to your comment, are you just weirdos? No, you talked about the statistic that said fewer people are getting married. There's a statistic that says that 40% of millennials feel like marriage is an unnecessary institution.
Wow.
And you have to sit and a little bit look at it from their view of saying, depending on the statistic, roughly half of them end in divorce. So they see that happening and the impact for them. And then a whole lot of the ones that aren't divorced may not look very compelling. You go, okay, they're still married, but gee, that doesn't look like a lot of fun. They don't look like they're enjoying each other. So it is, I don't think it's in a great place. The other piece that's interesting, we talked a little bit about, as you get to our age and empty nesters, gray divorce, which is when you're over 55, has doubled since 1990. So you have a whole lot of people who get past raising kids and then they give up on it.
Well, and I think we also know just the importance of marriage and the security that brings a family. And, so as a marriage goes, that's the way the family goes. And I don't think it takes a lot of digging to know that when a family is disrupted by divorce, that there's higher drug abuse in the family, there's higher rates of suicides, the health and behavior and emotional issues of children especially, academic problems, it goes on and on and on. And so it just seems like as a church, and I mean that in the broad sense as well as in the smaller sense, big C and little c church, that to provide strong marriages, we are really serving our world that much better by coming alongside these families and providing the security that they need in order to be able to navigate this really difficult world.
I think there's other dynamics going on just in our culture too, that's aside of the, gay marriage and things like that. There's also technology, so we all have this wonderful little device that does lots of neat things, lots of good things, but there's also some unintended consequences in terms of the distractions, some of the stuff that it can provide. And it's interesting, the average person right now spends 2.5 hours a day on their phone. And the average couple only spends 35 minutes a week in any substantial conversation. You know, so you have those things that start to pull you apart. You've got the pace of life if you have kids that are playing baseball and soccer and basketball and dance and school events. And all of that is just kind of pushing out people making their marriage a priority. And so I think that's some of the other pressures that are going on as we try to cram so much in. We have so many distractions. And then you may sit and go, and my marriage is okay. You know, so there's no fire to put out. But then when you get 20 years down the road, there's no relationship either.
I'm really concerned that during the time of COVID that we're doing this, that there's even some abuse or maybe even some subtle stress being added to marriages as never before. Are you guys seeing that happen?
Absolutely. And if you look at the statistics for the abuse hotlines and things like that, they're up dramatically. The other piece that's hard is a lot of times when they're both home all day, if there's abuse going on, there's not a safe time to call and say, I need help. So COVID, I think, has certainly taken, if there are some stresses or fractures in a marriage, it's just made them bigger.
Is there any advice or counsel you would have at that point about how to overcome stressors like that? I don't know that anybody has all the answers, but we have some counselors available through the Cincinnati Area Baptist Association, and we've had several pastors take us up on that in the past year, and I think a lot of that is due to COVID. So, I mean, these biblical counselors, we have 3 actually. We have a woman, we have 2 men. One guy even has his doctorate in biblical counseling, but we're trying to help, you know, our pastors be able to do that. But that's not necessarily available to those in their church. One of the things that I was reading in some George Barna statistics is that in marriages right now and in families, 70% of our pastors say that they have exceptional marriages, where only about 46% of those of their church members would say they have it. I mean, are pastors lying through their teeth? I mean, are they afraid to answer a survey wrong? I don't know. Where you've worked with a lot of church members, I know, in these churches, what are you hearing? What are some examples that you have?
Well, unfortunately, I think we all have the examples of everything seems okay. You know, I can go to an accountability group I was in. There were 4 of us. We met for 3 years. We moved out of town, and I think within 2 years, half of the group was divorced.
Oh, wow.
You know, and none of that ever came up, you know, in the accountability group for us to go, okay, how do we get you help?
Now, Mary, the same thing happened with us. We were leading a Bible study, and then when we moved to another town to take another job, one of the couples got a divorce within just a few months. He had an affair, unfortunately, and nobody knew it the whole time. Practically, they were in our Bible study class. So, I mean, yes, I can see that happen. That transparency is tough to get to in a small group.
It is hard. It's going to be especially hard, I think, for pastors. You know, who wants to stand up in front of their church and go, we're struggling, as I'm trying to lead you and teach you.
Well, and I think actually, I'm sure that all of us know of those people that we don't know there's a problem until all of a sudden they filed for divorce. And I think that especially pastors probably feel that of their congregants. They don't even know there's an issue. But, you know, when you speak about pastors, I mean, I think that statistic, I pray it's true. I know personally, though, Curt and I went to a church that there were 1,500 attenders, so a fairly large church, and took, I would say, everyone by surprise when the pastor ended up leaving with the church counselor. And yeah, it was devastating. We were in our mid-30s, and I would have to say, I think it especially affected the men, and that they were saying, if this could happen to our pastor, then why do I not think it could happen to me? And so I think it was, in that sense, I think for some of us, it was a wake-up call. But I also know that it was devastating, and it took years for the church to recover from that situation. And so, you know, I pray that that statistic is true, but I also know that there are particular stresses on those in ministry that are different from those in the congregation.
You know, your question's hard, Mark, to go, you know, how do you help that? But I think part of the answer, which is what I hope is some encouragement for the people listening, is the church needs to do more than it is right now to help, I'll say, preserve marriages. So conversations I have with pastors, you know, talking about what they do for marriage ministry, typically, and statistics show 3 out of 4 churches look like this. We do premarital counseling, and then when they're in crisis, we talk to them.
Yeah.
And typically, when you hit crisis, you've been in crisis, and you're about 5 or 6 years too late to start to have those conversations. And it's, you know, I don't want to say it's too late, because God can do, you know, anything, but you've really made it hard. And so I think the church needs to step in that middle spot that says, what can I do to help preserve this marriage so we never even get to that crisis conversation? And I don't think a lot of that happens. And I feel like, let me be real careful with what I'm about to say. We spend a lot of money on children's ministry, and I'm not saying that's bad. So, you know, don't hear what I'm not saying. But how much will the children be impacted with a really good program, 1 to 2 hours a week, if they then walk home to disaster for the rest of the week? You know, and so I think the church needs to do more. And I, you know, that's part of what I hope, again, people are encouraged by. That's just, this is important stuff. It is under attack lots of ways, culturally, you know, just the stresses of life, and how do we help people navigate it better?
Is there one of those just right off the bat you can think of that would be a tip for a pastor to be able to help him be able to develop eyes and ears, sensitivity to a couple that may be under undue stress, perhaps? I mean, like an obvious one to me is if they one of the spouses loses their job, financial pressure is right there. Immediately go, hey, pastor, I just lost my job. Boom, you know. But even then, what does a pastor do? So, just any ideas you might.
Well, I think a couple things that, you know, obviously you need to have a community that comes alongside couples wherever they're at. And each church is, I'm sure, kind of organized in different ways. We are part of a community group, and you know, you would hope that there's vulnerability and openness in that community group, so that at least there's one shepherd, whether it's a deacon or a community group leader, that knows what's going on in a family. Because it may not even be comfortable in a community group to be sharing that with, you know, 6 or 7 other couples. But you would hope that there's at least some shepherding that's going on that's hitting the individual level. And I think the other thing that, you know, Curt was kind of alluding to is that I think so many people think that marriage should just happen, and that a healthy marriage just kind of, gosh, it just kind of worked out that way. And I thought, we know better than that. We know that with parenting, it takes a lot of work and a lot of intentionality. And, you know, we read books and we put time into it and we invest in it. Why would we think it's any different from marriage? And I think that probably it's having a investment attitude when it comes to marriage, and that it's going to take time, it's going to take energy, it's going to take maybe money. And I don't know that it's necessarily even money from the church, but I think it's developing in the congregants this realization that a good marriage often doesn't just happen. there's been work that's been done along the way in order to make sure that it's a strong, healthy, encouraging marriage. And so probably my encouragement would be for pastors to take a step back and think, what are we doing? We know that a marriage is important. We don't have to be convinced that, God thinks it's important, that we know that it's going to affect our families, that, even economically, it's going to affect our families. It's going to affect our children. It's going to affect generations. What can we do in order to come alongside these people so that they're not in crisis and we get them, 5 years earlier before it's an issue?
Yeah, I mean, what Susan's kind of talking about is how do you create a marriage culture? And just a little realization for me more recently, so there's this element of success in marriage is if when one of us dies, we're still married. And that's been changed to go, no, don't I want a growth mentality that says the last year of our marriage is actually the best one?
Wow.
And as you keep going, you're investing, you're being intentional, so that it just keeps getting better. And we have that kind of mentality for so many other things, our career, what our kids do, but we don't necessarily have it for our marriage. And so I think there's a culture that says, let's talk about marriage, let's teach about marriage, let's learn about marriage. And I think some of that's also will probably bring more transparency. If someone's having some struggles, to say, hey, that's okay. And the church is here to help me get through it and get past it and continue to grow in our relationship.
Well, I assume with Grace Marriage, you guys have learned tons about marriage, and I appreciate you guys being a little bit on the experts or a couple of steps ahead of where some of the rest of us are. Are there one or two things that you've picked up out of your relationship that would help the rest of us?
I would go, there's three things. And the first, that's not all inclusive, but from what's Curt learned over the years and what's Curt learned from Grace Marriage, one is we live in a consumer-based performance culture, and that comes into our marriage. So I will come home, and if I've had a bad day, Susan will have done something, and my response is not appropriate. I'll bite her head off. It's not because of what she did, it's because of the bad day. Susan's now faced with a choice. She can go, okay, well, if that's the way you're going to behave, here's your consequence. Okay, and that's kind of what a lot of the culture is. Or she can go, Curt had a bad day. So instead of running away or giving a consequence, let me move closer to him, let me give him grace and keep a wall from being built. And so I don't think, let me phrase positively, we need to bring more grace into our marriage. Christ gave us grace through nothing that we did or deserved. So how do you bring that same mentality to go, I need to give my spouse grace? So that's one. A second one, I think, is gratitude. We are not grateful people. And so how often do we pause and go, what do I appreciate about Susan? And let me tell her. And you start thinking differently rather than, gee, clothes weren't washed. I thought she was going to stop and pick this up for us, and she didn't. Or Curt didn't get the yard cut. Curt, whatever it is, rather than focusing on the negative, you start to focus on the positive. And so I think that makes a whole difference as well. And then I think the last piece, which we've talked about, is intentionality. The average family spends $2,400 a year on their kids' sports. What's your budget line to go date your spouse? And it kind of gets the short end of the deal, because we convince ourselves that there's other things that are more important. It's more important for me to go to my son's soccer game than to keep the relationship with Susan alive and vibrant. Well, you know what? My son's going to win more long-term with the strong, vibrant relationship with Susan than that I was at that soccer game and saw him run around. But that's not the world we're in. So the three that I would say are important is, how do you bring grace and not performance for your marriage? How do you really focus on gratitude? And how do you start to be intentional and invest on a regular basis in your spouse?
I think that sound like the foundation you mentioned earlier about having the culture of marriage in a church. Those almost sound like the building blocks of that. That I mean, how does a church prioritize marriage in the middle of prioritizing so many other things that are calling for their attention and time?
There's probably the tension in our world, right? It's like you have a whole bunch of things you want to do. Part of my encouragement is just things go really well if the marriages are working. The kids that are showing up for Sunday school are going to be in a different place if the marriages are working well.
But it is.
I don't know that I gave you a very good answer.
No, prioritize marriage in the church. I don't know that I've ever been in a church that does that or creates a culture of marriage. I was listening to some Andy Stanley stuff talking about a culture of generosity and how you've got to constantly be asking church members about giving, and not only reminding them, but also reminding them of what the funds are for and what it's needed for. And I could see visiting every month, being able to talk about the importance of marriage in a pastor's family and encouraging that in their membership and in their small groups. Mary Lee and I had a chance to interview a church. I was developing research for a book, and one of the guys who is now a pastor actually started off right out of the Navy. He was building these cell phone towers, and at any rate, he and his wife were believers, but their marriage was really rocky. And they thought, both of them in their background, if they had any disagreements at all, they thought that was out of bounds and that they should immediately get a divorce or split or separate or whatever. So in desperation, both of them independently got invited to the same small group. And so they came to the same small group, and people were so open. By the end of the small group, it was one of them, I don't know if it was the man or the woman. You type the transcripts if you want to help from the interviews. But I mean, he said basically they both admitted that their marriage was really in trouble. And immediately the men got up and took the man out of this double wide trailer they were meeting in, and the women stayed in and they counseled with them and they talked about how important it was to pray together and work things out. And they had never been in a group that encouraged couples to stay together. The only thing they knew from the Navy or the background of whatever is just blow up. Not that it's universal in the Navy. I'm just using his experience. But to even come alongside a couple and even be discipled and equipped in a church to be able to have a couple have the handles and tools, man, that would be just incredible. I mean, is there discipling that a church needs to do, or they need to bring you guys in? I mean, what would you recommend?
Well, one thing that I feel like I think we can speak to, and we'll get a little bit more into grace marriage, but we mentioned our church is not that large. I mean, we have maybe at the top 150 attenders, right?
And that's counting kids.
Yeah, and last year we had 40 couples, so we're talking 80 people. And we've got a lot of young people, so they're not even all married, attend grace marriage. And you were talking about how can the church come alongside one another. And one thing that we've been very encouraged is that, fast forward 8 years now that we've been at the church. And so these kids have gotten married. I say they're kids because they're my kids' age. They've gotten married and now they're having children, 2 and 3 children. It's kind of a population explosion at our church. But what's interesting is because for the last 4 years, we've had so many of our kids attend grace marriage. It has become a bit more of a culture of promoting and encouraging marriage. And one of the things that I've really enjoyed seeing, in fact, I was just noticing a couple put on Facebook, yeah, grace marriage encourages us to have date night. And they were talking about what they did for their date night. And our son and his wife attend our church as well. And their date night was they had a painting. They got these like pretty inexpensive canvases, and they set each other like against each back to back, and they painted each other. And that was their date. So they stayed at home. They've got 2 little babies at home. They can't really and it didn't cost that much money. There have been couples that have worked out. They're going to watch their kids. If they'll, the next week, the other couple will watch their kids so they can have date nights. So we're seeing a bit of that coming alongside with the one another. And I think for pastors, it's got to be overwhelming. You can't keep in touch with everybody to the degree that you probably want to. And this is where you've really got to train and encourage the congregates to somewhat take care of each other. And I would have to say, I do think that's where Grace Marriage kind of can come in, because it doesn't put one more thing on the pastor's plate.
Okay, talk about Grace Marriage.
So Grace
Yeah.
So Grace Marriage is really designed to give a structure for churches to disciple marriages, and to do it in a way that doesn't, as I kind of put it, add another brick onto the pastor's wagon. So it's really designed to be lay-led, to be participant paid, so it doesn't hit the budget and it doesn't hit the time. And Grace Marriage works to provide the training for the facilitators, and it's not a lot of teaching, so that's where it's not a hard thing to do. But the key structure is really marriage coaching that happens once a quarter. So a group of 10 couples would get together, and for 4 to 6 hours, it depends on whether or not you choose to do a dinner or lunch, you use the Grace Marriage content and you work through a theme and material as that group. Probably 80% of the time is you're talking with your spouse, but there's a little bit of time that if people want to share on a group basis, they can do that. The general structure of that 4 to 6 hours is there's going to be 6 lessons. There's always one on gratitude. So it always starts out somehow coming about, what do you appreciate about your spouse? Write it down, talk about it, share it. You always do that. There's always some time that we call intimacy igniter. So basically, if I use Mark, you, and Mary Lee, you'll get 15 minutes to go, Mary Lee, here's the issue going on right now. Here's what we need to talk about. And then Mary Lee gets 15 minutes to go, Mark, here's the issue we need to talk about. There'll be some starter questions if people don't have that. But one of the rhythms that starts to happen is we now see the couples at our church coming into Grace Marriage saying, you've created space for us to talk. It's a time of non-conflict. And so they walk in knowing what the issue is that they need to work through. And so it gives them a way to be very proactive rather than, reactive and blowing up, to deal with the, whatever the issue is that they've got going on in their life. And then there's also a section called the 621 challenge we always do, which is Matthew 6:21, where your treasure is, that's where your heart's going to be. So it's, okay, over the next 90 days, because these sessions are quarterly, what are you going to do to intentionally date your spouse? Let's plan it. Let's talk about ideas, because it doesn't have to mean a lot of money. There's creative things that you can do. But what are you going to do? And get your calendars out, mark them up, plan it, and get that on there. And so each quarter there is new content. There typically is a theme. So one quarter the theme was your cell phone. What's it doing to your relationship? And again, let's be proactive to go, what are we going to do about it? So rather than 5 years down the road, you realize it's done something, you go, hold it, it's doing something, and I'm going to control it rather than it control my marriage. So that's kind of what's going on. And again, it's all structured to make it easy to do and to train the people at the, a lay leader at the church to kind of lead it.
Okay. All right. What's the entry point? What is how does this work in a church? You guys live in Indianapolis. Do you travel to Cincinnati once a month? What if we have, several churches involved, or is this a Zoom thing during COVID especially?
It would be, we've continued to do ours in person at our church. So what we would do is Grace Marriage has a whole staff. So Mark, if your church said, hey, we want to go do this, we would step alongside beside your church and go, who's the person that's going to be the leader of it? And then we would work to train them, give them the information that they need, give them the training that they need, but really that person would kind of own it for the church.
Okay.
We would just do everything to get them all equipped, give them promotional materials, give them everything that they need to go be a success.
So they're kind of a recruiter, but a convener, champion, that kind of thing. Okay.
Yes.
How does the pastor get that started? Does he need to recruit that person, that convener, or does he want to check you guys out and meet with you first, or how does this work?
Well, we would be happy to chat with any pastor, but I think then the step is who could be a marriage champion in your church. And so the pastor would want to identify that person, and then we would want to get them involved in these conversations as well, help them understand it and see if this makes sense. And then if the answer is yes, how do we equip the church for them to go roll it out and be successful?
Okay. Is there any stigma if you're a part of this that your marriage is on the rocks, or how do you position this?
That's a great question, and I would say absolutely not, because we are very clear this is not for crisis counseling. This is coaching. And really, if you think about the premise of it, this all was born out of the founder of Grace Marriage is named Brad Rhodes, and Brad is a lawyer. And he was working with his church with kind of like Curt and I were, or do, premarital counseling and maybe doing some mentoring, nothing very much, but he had a law practice. And he decided to get a business coach. And so every 90 days, he was sitting down with his business coach and kind of, they'd set some goals, and then 90 days later, they sit down. How did it go? What do you need to work on? Oh, wow, I forgot I was going to do this, reset, that type of thing. And he thought, my goodness, and his business just all of a sudden exploded. And he said, if this works for business, how might this work for marriages? And so that was kind of the premise of like getting coaching for your marriage. So every 90 days, you're sitting down and you're doing a reset. Now, at the same time, the encouragement, and Curt and I actually do this weekly on Sunday night, we sit down and there's like 4 questions that we work through with each other. So it's not like you only work on it every 90 days. It's the fact that you have kind of sat down and you've set some goals, but then during the time in between, the interim, you're sitting down, once a week and saying, the first one is, what's something that your spouse has done this week that you're grateful for? And you have to think, okay, oh, wow, thank you for going to the grocery store for me. I don't like to go to the grocery store. So when Curt does it, I'm always very grateful. And then there's like 3 other questions to work on. How are you doing on one of the things that you wanted to set as a goal? So it's kind of nice that weekly you're doing that, but then every quarter you're sitting down and you're setting goals for your marriage. So I would say no, at our church, there's not the stigma that if you're part of Grace Marriage that you're in crisis. The other thing I would say has been really encouraging is not only are there these couples that are, in fact, we had one couple call, 2 months before they were getting married and asked if they could join Grace Marriage right after they were married. So, I mean, that's how quickly, and I would say also the encouragement that they had from other people.
I was going to say, I think that's part of what happens if you create this culture, that we have people signing up because people are saying, you need to do this. This is great for your marriage. It's not gee, we're in trouble, it saved us. It's like, this has been really good for us, and hop in.
And not only a brand new couple, but we have had several couples visit that have been married 30 years, like Curt and I. And so it's not confined to any particular age group. And I would say what's fun is that when we get together with the 10 couples, it's all ages. And it really isn't geared towards one age group.
And also, what about those that are considering marriage, that are engaged or whatever? Can they plug in as well, or is there a separate track for them?
There is not a separate track for them. They can plug in whenever they're married. So to Susan's point, we had a couple that got married in January and they started in Grace Marriage in February.
Okay. All right. Well, I remember you saying that, but I didn't know if, there were some couples. One of the things when Mary Lee and I were in a church replant, we were living in the Atlanta area. We had a couple that both came to faith in Christ, and they had 2 or 3 children, the firemen, and they weren't married. And they became under conviction right away that they needed to separate in their own house. The guy, I think, went down the hall or something like that and slept. And but they got counseling, and they started up in 3 to 4 weeks. They got married. It was the point. And we always thought that was interesting, that the Holy Spirit convicted them, because we are seeing a lot of couples come to faith in Christ, and marriage has never been on their radar. It's not even an issue in this culture. And so
Right.
that's why I was curious how quick that.
Well, that could be something that it would be up to how the pastor might want to handle it, because if your firefighter description, to some extent, you could go, they're married. It's not the 23-year-old that, sorry about our dog, the 23-year-old that, is going to get married, and, they don't have 3 kids and things like that. So.
I didn't know if it sparked any ideas. Mary Lee, do you have any questions, or Kumar or Charity? I don't know if there's other questions. Those were some of the ones that I brought. Kumar, be sure to hit your space bar.
It seems like, is this on? It seems like that your starting point would be finding that couple or couples that would want to be the champions of this in the church. So, as you said, I mean, we have a brand new pastor. This will be his 2nd week. He wouldn't know where to begin to find a couple, that would want to champion this. So it would seem
how
like
do they recruit?
Right. And it would be, so you're saying we need to kind of find, each church would need to kind of find that couple. And then
They would. I mean, but the church also has to say marriage is going to be a priority, and we want to put something in this, I'll call it marriage preservation space.
Okay.
And maybe they're a champion, maybe they don't know they're a champion yet.
Right.
And the pastor just goes,
but would be willing to come and explore and get
Mhm.
a day. You said it was like a day's training is what
we actually do it online now.
Okay.
So they could kind of do it at their own convenience. But to some extent, that's how we ended up here, is going, we care about marriage.
Mm-hmm.
We got exposed to it and said, oh, this looks really cool. Let's go give it a go.
I can also say, though, it's really not difficult to be the facilitator. And so that first year we did like what we called a pilot group. And so we had the pastor, the associate pastor, people, we had
Elders.
Yeah, elder and their wives. So we had a group of 10 just to say, okay, is this going to work? What's our thought here before we go out and, make it for the whole congregation. And so we had that first year. And then the second year, it was like, no, let's go ahead and do this. But what was very interesting, I think it was like the last quarter, we had one of the couples that said, hey, we really, really like Grace Marriage. We'd like to be a leader next year. And another couple said, we would as well. And it was like, okay, wonderful. And then what was interesting is we had another couple who had just had twins. And I found out that night that what they were expecting again within like 6 months. I was like, no, we're saving you from yourself. You will not be leaders of Grace Marriage. But would you know that they are this year? And so we have not had to recruit as we've grown from one group of 10 couples to, we had 4 groups of 10 couples last year. We didn't have to recruit the leaders because they were like, oh, this seems very doable. It's not that time consuming. And out of just participating, their passion came to light.
Good.
I'm sorry, did Kumar have a question?
Thank you.
We couldn't hear you, Kumar. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I really don't have a question.
Okay.
We're glad to have you on today. That's cool. What else, Curt and Susan, what else do we need to know about Grace Marriage? Any commitments on behalf of participants? How is your time paid for or provided for? What do you recommend?
Well, is there a workbook that we work through on those? I guess it's 4 meetings a year that you actually come together with, or your 10 couples. I mean, yeah, you're 10 couples, so it's a group of 20. Are you working through a workbook, or is it just a set of questions?
There's a workbook that comes, and in that, typically, if you want to grab one, yeah, there's the lesson, so there's material on the lesson, and that can be, you kind of read through or work through it as a group. We also provide some videos that you can kind of bring up and show that. The founder and he and his wife will talk through it. Then there are some worksheets you work through as a couple, and then you kind of turn and talk. So that's kind of what a quarterly book looks like. Each time it's new content, but you kind of have, you know, some things to work through and then some worksheets. This is all provided by Grace Marriage, you know, so that's where to some extent the leader or the facilitator is almost just making sure people stay on track timeline. Not a lot of heavy teaching. And so to Susan's point, the preparation for me is probably only about a half hour for each quarterly session. So you do that.
These are the weekly questionnaires. So we actually pull this out of our book and weekly, you know, go through reflecting on last week. What am I thankful for about my spouse and his or her investment into our family? Is there anything weighing on you? How can I pray for you this week? And that's just a nice question that we work through. What are a few action items I could do that would help you this week? Sometimes it's like, I don't have anything. Sometimes it's like, you know what, if you would do this for me this week, that would be, you know, take my mom to the grocery store. That would be wonderful. And then the last, when will we spend one-on-one time together this week? And sometimes it's, you know, okay, you know what, we're going to be with the kids and we're going to do this, and that'll be kind of some time that we can spend together. And then how's my progress on my one thing? And that's the kind of the goal that you've set. So we go through that weekly, and then we actually spend our Sunday night and pray pretty much for our family.
So we have that. And then from a cost in terms of this, it's $200 a couple per year for that content. And that's kind of all provided then, and it's all there. There's nothing that comes to us that way. Everything is part of the $200. That includes people in Owensboro who will help you plan your promotions, help you, how do you you know, advertise it. Here's
the headquarters for
so Owensboro, yep. And here's a video that you can use that, you know, is free of charge. Oh, you need some sign up sheets. We got those too. So really, there's the $200 fee for the content, and that covers everything, any help you might need.
Now, our church has decided, because this is an investment that the church wants to make, is that they come alongside $100 per couple, and that extra $100 goes towards the meal. So we have a hospitality, you know, 2 gals that work with us, that every time we meet, right now because of COVID, it's boxed lunches, but we're making it work. So $25 each session is for the 2 couples or the 2 people to have a dinner. And we try to make it really nice, and we have snacks and different things like that. So our church, this is the way that they're investing in the marriages. But if you think about it, counseling is pretty expensive. And so as a couple, $200 a year is very little when you think about counseling. And I would also say for the church to come alongside a couple and say, we're going to invest $100 per couple if they're going to commit to Grace Marriage. And that helps with the food and makes it more of like a date night feel towards the time that we're together again. So it's kind of it's a really enjoyable 6 hours that we spend together. It goes really fast because it is a little bit more like a date night, and your kids are taken care of, you know, are at home. And so this is just a time for you to focus on your marriage.
So to be clear, it's $200 for the content. And then this $100 Susan's talking about is if you choose to do a meal.
How's it been working as far as, I know we can put things on the calendar in our church and our Sunday school class for months. And then there are always people at the last month say, oh, I forgot. I've already planned to do this or that. And you feel like you've done all this work because it's been on the calendar forever, this event you're planning, and then but nobody else bothered to put it on their calendar. You know, it's important, you thought for your whole class. So what is your
people do make the commitment for a year. So when when they sign up, they are committing for the 4 times that we're meeting. We also have our leaders that try to communicate, I don't know, a couple times in that quarter, and especially 2 or 3 weeks ahead of time saying, okay, we make sure that this is on your calendar. The problem that we run into at our church is that because there are so many young people, their weddings, and they're kind of like, you know, I can't make it because I'm in a wedding, my cousin's getting married, whatever. But what is really worked out well for our church is that because we have 2 different weeks we're working. So last year we had 2 groups meet on one Sunday or one Saturday, and then 2 groups meet on the other Saturday. So if by chance you couldn't make it on your week, you could come the week that you could make. And really, because it's all content driven, it really doesn't matter if you're at one week or the other week.
I think you have to be, how do I say this? Strongly encouraging too. I mean, you have to get people to have an investment mentality, to just go, this isn't just something on your calendar. This is an investment, an important investment. And oh, by the way, when the soccer game happens, find someone else to take your son to the soccer game, because they'll win long term if you do this. So there's a little bit of that. I think when you get into the rhythm, then the couples are going, oh, this is really good, and they start to make it a priority. I was talking to someone who's in it again this year. They've already arranged that his in-laws are taking their kids for the weekends that they go to Grace Marriage. So he's got the whole year planned out already to go, my kids are gone, I'm not going to be disrupted that way. We're going to do Grace Marriage, and it'll be a little weekend alone time for the 2 of them.
And as we mentioned, our son and his wife have now 2 little ones. And so Curt and I are facilitators one week, and our son and his wife go a whole different week. That was definitely intentional. But that allows us, on that Saturday night, we have our grandchildren. And that's an investment that we can make in their marriage. And so I would say that if you have older couples, or we have couples too, that one couple meets one week, another couple meets another week, and they trade with their kids. And the wife goes and stays, babysits for the other family. And so it doesn't even cost them babysitting. So I think it's again, being creative, but if people have that mentality that this is important, and also if you've made it nice, you know, it's a dinner together, we're going to sit around and talk to each other. It's going to be fun. We're going to be with other couples.
Yeah, I joke that the dinner shouldn't be hey, there's a box of pizza back there and some water bottles. You know, so we have tablecloths and we have centerpieces, and you know, we try to make it nice again to have an appeal to go, they want to be there.
All right, now you really piqued our interest. If we want to participate with this, do we email you guys, or do we go online and sign up? How do we contact you guys?
The best first step would be to have a conversation with me.
Okay, and how do they do that?
They could call me. I don't know, you could, you've got my phone number, Mark, you could shoot out to them, or shoot me an email at curt@gracemarriage.com.
Great, C-U-R-T.
Yes.
Gracemarriage.com. That's
Yes.
awesome. Guys, you all have been tremendous today. Grace Marriage sounds like a wonderful system. It's a program, but not a program in the sense that it really is providing that coaching, and you've got the guide to take people along with it. So I really do appreciate you being with us today, and want to wish you both a happy Valentine's Day coming up. And that was kind of our timing for doing this in February. And I just appreciate everybody else that's listening in and might want to be able to take advantage of this. Contact me to contact them, or contact them directly. Listen, thanks guys, I appreciate it.
Well, Mark, we appreciate the opportunity to do it. And again, I hope people walk away encouraged to go, marriage is important. And, you know, how do we help support that?
All right. I'm going to stop the recording.